Hello, my name is Demi Villaro, though for most of my life, it was the name no one dared to say out loud. My mother called me a failure. My brother called me dramatic, and when my grandfather died, they erased me from the will like I'd never existed. But I remember everything, especially the night they handed me an empty box and called it legacy. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. I walked into that courtroom alone, and when the judge read my name as the true heir, my family finally saw me for what I really was, the storm they never saw coming. But how did we get there? How did the people meant to love me become the ones I had to fight in front of a judge? Do you want to know what they did before the courtroom, before the smile faded from my mother's face? Let me show you. The drive from my apartment to the Langford estate always felt longer than it actually was. Maybe it was the silence in the car, the kind that pressed down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. By the time the iron gates came into view, my palms were already damp against the steering wheel. Savannah's air hung heavy with that slow southern humidity, wrapping around me like a warning. The house stood the same as it always had. Pristine, smug, too proud to age. White pillars, trimmed hedges, not a leaf out of place. The Langfords never allowed imperfection, not even on the trees. I parked near the edge of the driveway, behind a line of luxury cars that gleamed like trophies. Mine was the only one that looked like it belonged to the help. Inside, laughter spilled through the open foyer. I could tell by the rhythm. It was the kind of laughter that came easy when people knew exactly where they stood. I'd forgotten that sound. "Demi, you finally made it!" My mother's voice floated down the hall, smooth and sugar-coated. "We were starting to think you got lost again." "I didn't," I said quietly. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flicked over me, my simple dress, my scuffed heels, like I was a stain on the rug. "Well, at least you tried this time." Cassian was across the room, surrounded by people. He looked the part, tall, tan, and dressed like success had been tailored just for him. When he noticed me, his expression barely changed. A small nod, a polite acknowledgement, like I was someone he might have gone to high school with but couldn't quite remember. Callista, his wife, waved a manicured hand. "Hey, Demi, you look comfortable." "Thanks," I replied. I'd learned that was the only safe answer in this family. One word, polite tone, no emotion. Mother gestured toward the long dining table. "Everyone, let's take our seats." Everyone but me. I hovered near the edge, searching for a name card that wasn't there. The table glittered with crystal glasses and gold-edged plates, every detail choreographed. I scanned each place, once, then again. Nothing. "Is there a spot for me?" I asked. Vera blinked, feigning surprise. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten to add one. But it's fine. You can sit at the sideboard, or maybe by the window. There's plenty of space." A few guests looked away. No one spoke. The clinking of silverware filled the silence she left hanging in the air. I found a chair near the window, half hidden behind a potted plant. The sunlight slanted across the table, catching the polished silver like it was mocking me. I poured myself water just to have something to do with my hands. The conversation flowed as if I didn't exist. They discussed investments, charities, Cassian's latest business venture. "Langford Realty is expanding," Callista bragged. "Cassian just acquired another property. Father would be proud." "Of course he would," Mother said. "Cassian has always been so reliable. He understands responsibility." Her gaze drifted toward me, resting just long enough to sting. Some of us take a little longer to find direction. I felt heat creep up my neck, but I didn't look away. I simply sipped my water. The old me would have swallowed the insult whole and tried to smile through it. The new me stored it like ammunition. Dessert came and went. Vera stood, glass in hand. "Before we end this wonderful evening, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my son. He's truly stepped up since Father passed." Cassian lifted his glass modestly. "Just doing my best, Mom." "Your best has carried this family," she said, "and we honored Father's wishes exactly as he wanted." Her words hit me like a slow, deliberate slap. "What do you mean?" "The will. she said lightly. It was read months ago. Everything's settled now. I stared at her. I wasn't told about any will reading. She tilted her head, pretending to think. You weren't? Oh, well, it wasn't really relevant to you, sweetheart. You've never been interested in the family business. Across the table, Cassian avoided my eyes. Callista picked at her dessert. The silence thickened, sticky as the southern air. I took care of Dad when he got sick, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I expected. I drove him to every appointment. I handled his medication. You called me the responsible one then. Vera smiled, that thin-lipped version she used when she wanted to end a conversation. And we appreciated that, but love and business are different things. You should know that by now. I felt the floor tilt, the same words she'd used when I was 18 and asked why she canceled my college tuition check. You should know better. Cassian cleared his throat. Mom, maybe? Cassian, she interrupted sharply. Let's not make this emotional. Demi's fine. She's independent. She's doing her own thing. Doing my own thing. That's what they called survival. I glanced around the table, faces turned back to their food, to their wine, to anywhere but me. This wasn't new. It was simply louder than usual. By the time coffee was served, I'd stopped tasting anything. I watched my brother laugh with a client, my mother whisper to Callista, her hand resting proudly on Cassian's shoulder. It was a portrait of the family she wanted the world to see. I excused myself quietly. No one stopped me. Outside, the air felt thicker, heavier. The cicadas had started their song, a low buzzing that matched the ache behind my temples. I walked along the side of the house, past the trimmed hedges, until I reached the hallway that led back inside. The portrait wall had changed since my last visit. New frames, bigger smiles, same story. My father's photo hung in the center, his expression distant, frozen in dignity. Cassian stood beside him, confident, polished. Vera glowed under the chandelier's light. And there I was, tucked into the far corner of the family photo, the edge of my shoulder fading into the frame, cropped by accident or by intention. I leaned closer. The glass reflected my face against the image, half of me in the present, half erased in the past. Mother's voice echoed faintly from the dining room. She'll understand one day. Some people just aren't built to carry a legacy. I straightened, the words settling into my chest like coals. Maybe she was right. I wasn't built to carry their kind of legacy. I was built to burn it down. I turned away from the wall, the faint hum of laughter fading behind me. The night air wrapped around me as I stepped outside again, letting the humidity cling to my skin until it felt like armor. For the first time that evening, I exhaled fully. No tears, no anger, just the quiet certainty that this night would not be forgotten. I stood there, staring at the frame that had erased me long after everyone else had gone home. That image stayed with me, cut off, half present, half forgotten. 2 weeks later, it was still the first thing I saw when I closed my eyes at night. The picture was supposed to represent family, but all I could see was proof that I'd never truly belonged. My apartment in Midtown Savannah was quiet in the way that made every sound feel too loud. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards when I moved. It was the opposite of the estate. No chandeliers, no noise, no eyes watching every move. Yet even here, surrounded by stillness, I could still hear my mother's voice in the back of my mind. You've never been interested in the family business. That sentence had replayed so many times it started to lose meaning, but the sting always stayed. Tonight, I pulled a cardboard box from under my bed. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Maybe I just needed to remember that I existed somewhere outside of their carefully edited family album. Inside were old photos, ticket stubs, report cards. And then I found it. A photo from my high school graduation. Everyone smiling. Everyone but me. I looked nervous, awkward, alone. My father was supposed to be there, but he'd had a meeting. My mother sent flowers instead. Busy week, she said on the phone that night. I traced the edge of the picture. My hair had been too short, my dress borrowed, but the look in my eyes was the same as the one I'd seen in the reflection that night at the estate. the look of someone quietly disappearing. That thought carried me back 17 years, to another sterile room, another paper I didn't understand. I was 17 when my mother called me to the hospital. She'd had a routine procedure, and I remember the nurse saying she'd be fine. When I walked into her room, she was already sitting up, phone in hand, typing something. She didn't even look up when she said, "Sweetheart, I need you to sign a few things for me." "Just insurance paperwork." I took the clipboard from her. My hands were shaking. I'd never signed anything legal before. The top of the form said, "Langford Estate, supplemental coverage." "What's this for?" I asked. "Just formality," she said, her voice smooth as ever. "You're listed under the family plan. They need your signature to keep it valid." She smiled then, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "You trust me, don't you?" Of course I did. I signed without reading past the first page. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but I didn't question it. I'd been raised not to. Now, sitting on my apartment floor years later, I could still picture that form, the lines, the boxes, the signature that had cost me more than I could have imagined. The next morning, I made coffee and pulled out my laptop. My small desk faced the window, where I could see the oak trees outside swaying in the warm breeze. It should have been peaceful, but my thoughts were sharp, restless. I typed in every search combination I could think of. Langford Estate legal documents, Savannah hospital forms, Langford insurance contracts. Nothing useful came up. I called the hospital and got transferred 4 times before someone finally told me that those records were archived. "Can I request copies?" I asked. "You'll need authorization from the estate's legal representative," the woman said. My mother. When I hung up, I realized my hands were trembling again, same as that day in the hospital. Except this time, the fear wasn't confusion. It was anger. For years, I'd told myself maybe I was exaggerating, maybe my mother's cruelty wasn't intentional, maybe Cassian really was more capable, more deserving. But as I sat there surrounded by silence and unanswered calls, I began to see the pattern. This wasn't neglect, it was design. By noon, I'd filled a notebook with everything I could remember: dates, signatures, phrases, details about the estate, even the exact color of the ink I'd used when I signed that form. The more I wrote, the more certain I became. They'd planned this long before the will was read. That evening, as I scrolled through my phone looking for distraction, an article popped up from Savannah Business Journal. The headline hit like a fist: "Langford Legacy, Cassian Langford expands the family empire." There they were again, smiling, perfect. My mother at his side, Callista's hand resting on his arm. The photo caption read, "Vera Langford praises her son's dedication to continuing the family's mission." I clicked on the video clip. "My son Cassian has carried on the legacy beautifully," Vera told the interviewer. "He has his grandfather's drive, his father's instinct." As for my daughter Demi, she's creative, independent, but she was never interested in the family's work. The reporter nodded, impressed. "So the future of the Langford estate rests with Cassian?" "Exactly," my mother said, smiling as though she hadn't just buried me with a sentence. "Every family has its strengths." I stared at the screen until the video ended. The reflection of my own face looked like someone I didn't recognize. There was something strange about hearing your erasure broadcast publicly. It wasn't just insulting, it was clarifying. For years, I'd excused her behavior as generational or cultural or maternal disappointment. But hearing her dismiss me so casually, with that polished voice she used for donors and journalists, erased whatever guilt I'd been carrying for feeling angry. I wasn't emotional. I was observant. That night, I pulled out a box of old documents from my closet. Most were meaningless, bank statements, letters from school, but near the bottom, something caught my eye. A sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, marked with an address I didn't recognize. Langford Dolman Law Offices, East Broughton Street. The handwriting was familiar, neat, deliberate, my grandfather's. I held it under the lamp, tracing the ink with my thumb. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. My chest tightened. It felt like the first real breath of air after being underwater for too long. I set the envelope on the table beside me and turned off the light. The apartment was silent again, But it wasn't empty anymore. Tomorrow, I'd open it. Not tonight. Tonight, I wanted to remember what it felt like to have hope, even if it scared me. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the city lights flicker across the dark sky. Somewhere out there, my family was probably celebrating another headline, another lie dressed up as success. But for the first time, I wasn't shrinking from it. For the first time, I felt something close to power. Quiet, invisible, but mine. The envelope sat on my kitchen table like it had been waiting for me all along. Its corners were yellowed, the paper soft from time, and the handwriting across the front was unmistakable. Steady, deliberate, the way my grandfather always wrote, as if every word carried a weight of intention. There was no return address, no seal of formality, just quiet certainty. I didn't open it right away. I made myself coffee first, watched the morning light spill across the counter, listened to the faint hum of cars outside my window. I wanted the world to feel normal before I shattered it. When I finally tore the flap open, the sound was small but final. Inside was a single sheet of paper, creased, faintly stained, and clearly scanned from an older document. My name was there, typed in bold, underlined as primary heir. My breath caught. The ink wasn't just my grandfather's, it was his way of leaving fingerprints on truth. There was a note clipped to the page, written in that same firm script. Keep this safe. They won't stop until they rewrite everything. I sat back in my chair. The room suddenly felt smaller, as though the walls had moved closer. For years, I'd wondered whether I was being paranoid, oversensitive, too emotional, as my mother always said, but this paper said otherwise. I folded it carefully and placed it inside a plastic sleeve. Then I opened my laptop and began typing dates, when my grandfather passed, when the will was supposedly read, when my mother had called it a simple legal matter. The timeline didn't add up. Someone had intervened between the original draft and what was presented publicly. I needed more. Proof wasn't enough. I needed the pattern. That afternoon, I drove to a small storage unit I'd kept since leaving the estate. Most of my old belongings were there, boxes of childhood books, furniture that didn't fit my apartment, things my family hadn't cared enough to throw away. The unit smelled of dust and forgotten years. I opened each box, one after another, until I found the one labeled bedroom. Inside, tucked between stacks of journals and outdated school trophies, was a leather-bound notebook I hadn't seen since college. My grandfather's handwriting covered every page, quotes, thoughts, bits of business advice. Toward the back, under a section titled Legacy Distribution, I saw the list of names. Cassian's, Callista's, mine. Only mine had been crossed out. The red pen dragged violently across the ink, leaving deep grooves in the paper. I ran my fingers over it. The indentation was uneven, almost angry. My grandfather's hand had never been this shaky. Someone else had done it. I closed the book slowly, my mind spinning. Why cross it out instead of removing it entirely? A message. A warning, or maybe an act of defiance he couldn't voice before he died. The thought made my chest tighten. He'd tried to protect me, even from within his own house. When I stepped back outside, the sun was already sinking, the light fading from gold to gray. Savannah evenings had a way of turning the air heavy, like secrets pressing against the skin. I locked the unit and leaned against my car, feeling the old familiar ache in my ribs, that mix of anger and grief that never fully left. I drove without music, letting the silence speak louder than anything I could have played. My phone buzzed halfway home, a news alert. I glanced at the screen. Langford family's vineyard project receives state grant. I pulled over. The article featured a photo of Callista, smiling under the Langford banner, champagne glass in hand. The caption read, "Her innovative redesign of the old vineyard has revived the Langford name." My pulse roared in my ears. That redesign, the plans, the sketches, the pitch idea, had been mine. I'd proposed it 5 years ago, sitting across from my brother at the kitchen table, explaining how the property could be repurposed into an eco-resort. Cassian had smiled, half listening, then told me it wasn't realistic. Now Callista stood on stage, accepting praise for her vision. I opened the comments section. People were congratulating her, calling her a modern visionary. My mother had even chimed in, so proud of my daughter-in-law's creativity. Not a word about me, not one mention of the person who'd planted that seed. I sat there in my car for a long time, the screen glowing in my hand. Somewhere between humiliation and revelation, something inside me shifted. It wasn't sadness this time, it was strategy. They'd used my silence as a weapon for years. Now I understood how powerful silence could be when it belonged to me. When I finally reached home, the sky had turned a deep shade of indigo. I placed the will and the journal on my coffee table, side by side. Together, they painted a story I already knew in my bones, that my family had built their legacy out of theft, not love. The next few days blurred together. I went to work, smiled when spoken to, performed every routine like nothing had changed. But at night, I read and reread those pages until I could trace every detail by memory. I even started keeping a folder labeled Patterns, a quiet map of lies. A week later, I drove past the Langford vineyard on my way to meet a client. The vines were being replanted under Callista's supervision. Workers carried crates of soil, and a new sign read, Langford Legacy, Rebirth of the South. I almost laughed. Rebirth. That word belonged to me more than it ever would to them. That night, I dreamed of my grandfather. He was standing by the porch, the same one where we used to play chess on Sunday mornings. In the dream, he didn't speak. He simply placed the journal in my hands again and nodded toward the horizon. When I woke, my pillow was damp, but I wasn't crying. Not exactly. The next morning, I placed both the journal and the copy of the will inside a fireproof box. I locked it, slipped the key into my pocket, and whispered to the empty room, "They think I've gone silent. Good." I wasn't done yet. I was just getting ready. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to make them regret ever stealing it. That night, after locking the fireproof box, I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank document. The blue light cast a soft glow across the living room, bouncing off the walls like quiet resolve. I typed 3 words at the top. Fraud case, D. Vellaro. My fingers hesitated above the keyboard. The rest would come. Evidence, timelines, dates, names. But first, I had to get my facts straight. The next morning, I called out of work. I wasn't sure what I would tell them. Stomach bug, migraine, maybe both. But the truth was, I needed the day to think. I needed silence. I needed answers. I had barely poured my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Savannah area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Demi? That voice. It had been years, but I knew it instantly. Isla Trent. She and I had grown up in the same circles, shared summers at Sapelo Island, cotillion classes, countless forced family events. She'd worked for the Langfords in her 20s, mostly bookkeeping and estate filing, but we hadn't spoken since she moved to Atlanta. Yeah, I said cautiously. I wasn't sure if this number still worked. Her voice trembled slightly. I didn't expect you to pick up. I didn't say anything. I waited. I saw the article, she said after a pause. The one about the vineyard project, and then the interview with your mom. Still, I didn't respond. Demi, she finally said, I think I owe you the truth. What happened? It wasn't what you think. I stood frozen by the kitchen counter, my coffee growing cold in my hand. I was working for the estate back then, 15 years ago. Vera asked me to witness some documents. She said they were just formality. Insurance stuff. For you. Isla's voice cracked. One of them was a waiver of inheritance. It said you relinquished your right to all Langford family assets. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I didn't know, she said quickly. I swear to God, Demi, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I trusted her. I thought she was your mother. I sank into the nearest chair. She even told me not to bring it up if I ever saw you again. Said you were sensitive, that you'd misunderstood the paperwork. Isla's words sped up now, tumbling one over the other. But after hearing her say on live TV that you were never interested, I knew she was lying. I'm sorry. I had to tell you. Do you still have copies? I asked, my voice flat. A pause. Maybe. I can check my backups. There's a chance. Please do. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just opened the document on my laptop again and typed under the title, Witness Testimony. Possible. Contact. I. Trent. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID read, Aunt Leonore. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a year. She was my father's youngest sister, quiet, soft-spoken, never one for family politics. I answered immediately. Hi, Aunt Leonore. She sounded breathless. Demi, I know it's been a while. I didn't want to intrude, but I saw the interview. What your mother said. That wasn't right. I know. There was a long pause, and then, your grandfather left something for you. Not the will they read in court. The one he gave me directly. He made me promise not to open it unless they tried to cut you out. My throat tightened. Can I bring it to you? She asked. It's yours. He meant for you to have it. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town the next morning. And I didn't sleep that night. My body was still, but my mind ran like it had been set on fire. I kept returning to Isla's words. She was your mother. I trusted her. People always said that about Vera. She had a way of making people believe her version of the truth. She wore honesty like perfume, just enough to smell convincing, but never real. By morning, I was wired on adrenaline and too much caffeine. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. Leonore was already there, a large envelope resting on the table between her hands. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, but her eyes, kind, alert, familiar, held the same warmth they always had. Demi. She stood and hugged me tightly. I'm so sorry it's come to this. She handed me the envelope without ceremony. It was thick, the kind of envelope lawyers used for last-minute filings. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's careful handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. Not typed, handwritten in black ink. To my granddaughter Demi, if you are reading this, it means the others have done what I feared they might. You were always the quiet one, the careful one. But you were also the one who showed up when no one else did. The one who saw people as more than what they owned. I built this for the family. I named you my heir for a reason. Because I believed in you. Because I trusted you to protect what mattered. Do not let them erase you. Love, Grandpa. Beneath the letter was a notarized copy of the will, the real one, the one with my name listed first. I stared at it, heart pounding. Leonore reached across the table and touched my hand. He gave that to me just a few weeks before he passed, said he had a bad feeling. I didn't understand it then. I do now, I whispered. That night, I laid everything out on my dining table. The letter, the will, the journal, my notes. It didn't look like much, just paper and ink. But to me, it felt like armor. I wasn't preparing for a confrontation. I was preparing for war. There was no more room for doubt, no space for second-guessing. Every excuse I'd made for them, every maybe they didn't mean it or maybe I misunderstood, died in that moment. I wasn't just taking back what they stole. I was going to rebuild everything they tried to destroy, starting with me. I opened a new document on my laptop and typed the title. Fraud Case, D. Villaro vs. C. Langford et al. And then, below that, in bold, this isn't about revenge. This is about the truth. He remembered the will. He remembered me. That was all I needed. The message came through my inbox just after 9 that night. I had been sitting in the same spot for hours, cross-legged on the couch, the dining table covered in documents, the dim light from the kitchen, my only company. When the email notification popped up, I nearly dropped the pen I'd been chewing on. From Arlen Ford. Subject: Inquiry regarding Langford Estate. D. Villaro. Body: I remember that will. I remember you. Let's talk. It wasn't long, but it landed like a gavel. I read it twice, then a third time, to be sure I hadn't imagined it. I set the laptop aside and stood up slowly, stretching limbs that had grown stiff from stillness. There it was, My first solid confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the things I remembered weren't fabrications of a neglected daughter's pain. They were real, and they were legally binding. The next morning, I called his office. His voice was deeper than I recalled, but steady, kind in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. "Miss Velaro," he said after I introduced myself. "I had a feeling you'd call me one day." We arranged a meeting for that afternoon. I showered, dressed in dark jeans and a navy blouse, then sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked older than I felt, but stronger too. There was no begging in her eyes anymore. By 2 o'clock, I was downtown, climbing the old stone steps of the Savannah Legal Records office where Arlen rented a suite. His receptionist smiled politely, led me down a hallway that smelled faintly of paper and lemon-scented polish. Arlen stood when I entered his office. "Demi," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again after the funeral." I shook his hand. "I wasn't sure I'd ever be here either." We sat across from each other. He didn't waste time. "I kept a copy," he said, unlocking a drawer. "The original will, signed by your grandfather. He asked me to file it discreetly. I did. But after he passed, I received a cease and desist letter from your mother's legal team. They claimed a newer will had superseded the one I held, said I'd be interfering if I released it." "Why didn't you fight it?" He sighed. "Because I didn't have proof that their document was false. And your mother, well, she's not a woman you take on lightly without backup. She threatened to have my license reviewed." "Of course she did. But you have your copy?" I asked. "I do. And I've kept it sealed, untouched. If you want to see it, I'll show you now." He pulled out a thick file envelope, laid it on the table between us, and slid it toward me. I opened it with steady hands. There it was. His name, my name, the signature, the date, the seal. "You were the sole heir," he said quietly, "until that signature vanished." I looked up. "And now?" "Now?" Arlen leaned back in his chair. "Now you've got a case. It won't be easy. They'll say you signed a waiver. They'll try to prove you abandoned the estate or gave up your claim. But if we can prove coercion or fraud, they forged their version or manipulated mine." He nodded. "Then it's game on." I left the office with copies of the will and Arlen's assurance that he'd stand by me. Outside, the sun beat down like summer had arrived early. I felt its heat soak through my skin, but inside, I was ice, focused, grounded. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to Arlen, not to the court, but to Vera. I wrote it in block letters on plain white paper, printed the scanned page of the will, and folded both into a manila envelope. No return address, no name, just a single line on the note. "You buried the truth." I kept it breathing. The next morning, I drove it to her mailbox myself, slipped it in, walked away. She wouldn't recognize the silence for what it was, not yet. She'd think it was weakness again, but I'd learned something about silence. It was never the absence of strength. Sometimes it was the weapon you honed in private. I didn't go home right away. I parked at Forsyth Park, found a bench under the shade of an oak tree, and pulled out a notepad. I began sketching out a map. Who knew what, when they learned it, who stood to gain. I wrote Cassian's name at the top right corner, Callista's underneath, Vera in bold across the center, then Isla, Leonore, Arlen, each one connected by lines, dates, money, meetings. This wasn't just betrayal, it was infrastructure. I began drafting an email to a local investigative journalist I used to know. She'd gone to school with Cassian, but didn't care for him much. I remembered her calling him a country club phony with a trust fund attitude. I smiled at that memory. Maybe she'd like to see some documents. I didn't send anything that night. Instead, I opened my grandfather's letter again and reread the last line. "Don't let them erase you." That line had become my anthem. A week passed before I heard anything back. It came on a Thursday morning. I was brewing coffee when my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I answered, expecting a telemarketer, but it was Vera. "Demi," she said, her tone controlled but clipped. What exactly are you trying to do? I didn't answer. You've always been dramatic, but this is childish. You think you can win against me? You don't know the half of what you're playing with. I kept my voice even. Then maybe you should have thought twice before betting the house on a lie. There was a long silence. Then, just before she hung up, she hissed, You want to fight, Demi? You got one. And just like that, the gloves were off. I was watching the fire before it started, and they were about to fan the flames. That thought stayed with me as I stood at the entrance of the Langford estate, my heels sunk slightly into the manicured gravel path. The event banner flapped gently in the warm summer breeze, Langford Legacy Night, honoring a new era. Gold lettering on navy velvet, tasteful, expensive, completely manufactured. The estate glowed like a southern fairy tale. Lanterns lined the hedges, champagne flutes clinked in rhythm, and the smell of catered hors d'oeuvres floated through the garden. Vera had outdone herself. The entire event was staged for the press, a public coronation for Cassian. Another way to write me out of history, this time with a spotlight. My invitation had arrived 2 days earlier, thick with implication. There was no note, just a printed card with my name misspelled. Demi Velora. I smiled when I opened it. Subtle, but deliberate. It wasn't a typo. It was a message. They were daring me to show up. So I did. I wore black. Not a ball gown. Not cocktail attire. A simple, clean, sleeveless sheath that hugged just enough to be elegant, but not enough to invite comments. My hair was pulled back, face bare. No statement earrings. No smile. I wasn't there to blend in. I wasn't there to speak. I was there to witness. A young server greeted me at the valet station and hesitated. Name? Demi Velaro. She scanned her clipboard, frowned, and then gave a rehearsed smile. I believe they have you listed under supplemental staff. There it was. I tilted my head, met her gaze. Thank you. I stepped past her before she could offer an apology she wasn't allowed to say. The garden was full. Politicians, donors, realtors, old family friends who'd known me since I was a toddler and now avoided eye contact like I carried a disease. I moved silently through the crowd, a shadow against sequins and tuxedos. Near the grand dining pavilion, each table glimmered under soft yellow lights. Place cards were hand-lettered in calligraphy. I walked past table after table, Langford partners, Chamber of Commerce, City Council guests, until I reached the back row, near the service station. There was no card for me. No chair either. A young man in a server's vest whispered as I passed, They said you'd sit with staff. I nodded politely. Of course they did. I didn't sit. I stood along the perimeter of the event, near the hedges where the lights didn't quite reach. I could see everything from there. Cassian basking in attention, Callista posing for the photographer, Vera sipping white wine with her signature tilt of superiority. Can you get more wine for table 5? The voice startled me. A woman in a teal wrap dress tapped me on the shoulder, mistaking me for one of the caterers. Sure, I said, without blinking. She handed me her glass. I took it, walked straight toward the exit, and left it on the valet stand. On my way back, I passed the gallery of blown-up photos, portraits of the Langfords throughout the years, my parents' wedding, Cassian's graduation, Callista holding a shovel at the vineyard groundbreaking. And then I saw it, the one that made my jaw tighten. A shot of the vineyard design board I'd created in college, down to the sketching style and handwritten notes. The caption beneath it read, The Vision of Callista Quinn. I stared at it for several long seconds. Then I pulled out my phone, took a photo, opened my email, and typed, Subject, Intellectual Property, Misrepresentation, to Redacted. Attachment, vineyardproject.jpg. Message, Callista Quinn did not design this. I did. Original sketches available upon request. I hit send. Cassian took the stage 15 minutes later. I moved closer, staying in the shadows near the speaker stands. Vera stood beside him, radiant in navy chiffon. Tonight, we celebrate progress, she announced. And leadership. My son Cassian has embodied everything this family stands for. Vision, responsibility, legacy. A round of applause followed. Cameras flashed. Callista dabbed the corner of her eye with a silk napkin. When the noise died down, Cassian leaned into the mic. "Thank you for believing in me. I only hope to honor what my grandfather built and what my mother has carried forward." I almost laughed. That sentence was so carefully crafted, it could have been copywritten. I slipped away before dessert was served. As I neared the main gate, I felt a hand close around my wrist. "What are you doing here?" Cassian's voice was low, sharp. I turned, met his eyes. He looked polished, tailored suit, perfect posture, but his pupils had narrowed. He was rattled. "I'm watching," I said. "That's all." He didn't let go. "Why now?" I leaned in slightly. "I'm watching the fire before it starts." Then I pulled my arm free and walked out without another word. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. The dress felt like armor I needed to shed, so I changed into cotton shorts and a tank top, wiped off the trace of makeup, and tied my hair up. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my desk, and opened the folder labeled Langford Timeline. I added a new tab: Public Staging, Legacy Night, Photos, Guests, Quotes from the Speech, Misattributed Designs, Misused Estate Assets, Names of everyone in attendance. Then I moved to another tab titled Response Strategy. The first line read, "Let them write the story, then burn the script." I wasn't going to confront them at dinner parties. I wasn't going to scream at them in public. I was going to build a case so airtight it would choke them in court. I was watching the fire before it started, and they were about to fan the flames. That thought was still echoing in my mind when I walked into Arlen Ford's office 3 days later. The air inside smelled like coffee, old paper, and air conditioning that had worked a little too hard. His assistant led me down the hallway, lined with framed degrees, and when I reached the door, Arlen looked up from a pile of files and smiled. "You're early," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I didn't sleep much," I admitted. He nodded knowingly. "I've been going through the documents you sent over. This isn't a misunderstanding, Demi. This is coordinated. They knew what they were doing." He spread the papers across his desk, photocopies, scanned letters, notarized pages with signatures too clean to be real. He pointed to the timestamp on one file. "Look here, this date is impossible. It's dated 2 weeks after your grandfather's death, but his estate was already frozen. Someone backdated this to make it look legitimate." "Someone," I repeated, though we both knew who that someone was. Vera, always careful enough to appear innocent, but arrogant enough to think no one would question her. I took a deep breath. "Then we'll expose it." Arlen looked up at me. "Are you sure? This won't just stay in court filings. It'll be public record. The press will pick it up. They'll drag your family's name through the mud, and yours too." I met his gaze evenly. "My name's already been dragged through worse. At least this time, I get to pull the rope." He smiled faintly. "All right, let's do it." We spent hours reviewing evidence, every document, every phone call record, every signature that didn't match. My hands were sore from flipping pages. By evening, the office lights had shifted from white to amber, the sunset sneaking through the blinds. That's when Arlen's assistant buzzed in through the intercom. "There's someone here to see Miss Villaro." Arlen glanced at me. "Expecting anyone?" "No." The door opened, and a small woman stepped inside. Gray hair, pressed blouse, a worn leather purse clutched in both hands. It took me a moment to recognize her. "Brisa?" She nodded slowly, her eyes soft but uncertain. "Hello, Miss Demi." I hadn't seen her since my grandfather's funeral. Brisa had been with our family since before I was born, a quiet presence who always smelled of jasmine and starch. She had been more of a mother than Vera ever was, though I hadn't realized it until years later. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said. "But I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Arlen gestured for her to sit. "You worked for the Langfords, correct?" Brisa nodded. "For 30 years. I retired last year. I thought I was done with that house forever." She reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope, the edges yellowing with age. The night after the funeral, she began, her voice trembling slightly. Your mother came to me. She told me to burn a letter your grandfather had written. Said it was private, not meant for anyone to see. Arlen leaned forward. Did you? Brisa shook her head. I couldn't. I made a photocopy before I gave it back. Something in me knew it was wrong. I've kept it all these years. She slid the copy across the table. I picked it up with both hands, heart pounding. The handwriting was familiar, the ink faded but legible. To whoever finds this, know that my granddaughter is the rightful heir to what I've built. She has earned it, not by blood, but by integrity. If this document disappears, then so has the honor of this family. It was dated 3 days before his death. I swallowed hard. This matches the sealed version he left for me. Arlen compared them side by side. Same handwriting, same paper, same notary mark. It's authentic. Brisa clasped her hands together. I should have come sooner, but I was afraid. Mrs. Langford has powerful friends. She's not as powerful as she thinks, I said quietly. When Brisa left, Arlen turned to me. This changes everything. With her testimony and this letter, it's not just a civil dispute anymore. It's criminal fraud. Then file it, I said. He studied me for a moment. You're remarkably calm for someone about to take down her own family. I learned from the best, I said. My mother taught me that quiet doesn't mean weak. That weekend, the Langfords decided to hold what they called a reconciliation brunch, an attempt at civility. I received the invitation via courier, hand-delivered, as if the gesture meant something. I knew it wasn't peace they were offering. It was theater. I showed up anyway. The dining room looked like a magazine spread, sunlight streaming through lace curtains, silverware glinting, Vera seated at the head of the table like a queen holding court. Cassian stood near the window, phone in hand. Callista arranged flowers with her usual performative grace. Demi, Vera said, her voice smooth as honey. I'm glad you came. It's important that we all remember we're family, no matter what happens next. That's one word for it, I replied, taking my seat. She ignored the tone. I wanted to do something special. Father left behind a few keepsakes, and I thought it was only fair to share them. She reached under the table and produced several small velvet boxes, handing them out one by one. Cassian opened his. Inside was a gold watch. Callista's contained a locket. When Vera handed mine to me, she was smiling in that tight, brittle way that only meant danger. I opened the box. It was empty. Some inheritances aren't material, she said softly. I met her eyes. Some betrayals are. The table went silent. Cassian looked from her to me, uncertain whose side he was supposed to stand on. Callista fiddled with her locket like it was a shield. Vera leaned forward, voice still honey smooth. You should let this go, Demi. There's still time to walk away quietly. You're not built for this kind of fight. I've already been quiet, I said. That's how you got away with it the first time. I stood, placed the empty box in front of her plate, and smiled. Enjoy brunch. When I got back to my car, I saw a voicemail from Arlen waiting. Court date is confirmed, his voice said. They'll see the documents under oath. I hit play again just to hear it twice. I texted him back. Good. I'll see their faces when the truth is read out loud. They never gave me peace. So I built it myself. The morning of the hearing was unseasonably cool for early fall in Savannah. The courthouse stood tall and pale against the soft gray sky, the kind of overcast that made the air smell like metal and rain even if it never fell. I arrived early, dressed in a fitted gray suit that felt like armor. My hair was pulled back. No earrings, no perfume. I wanted no distractions, no softness. This wasn't a day for sentiment. Inside, the courtroom was quieter than I expected. A few members of the public sat in the back, local reporters with notepads, one woman I recognized from church growing up, a man in a wrinkled linen shirt, probably just there to see someone else's life unravel. Vera, Cassian, and Callista were already seated at the defendant's table. Vera looked like she was attending a charity luncheon, not a legal proceeding. Pearl earrings, perfect blowout, navy suit. Cassian fiddled with his tie. Callista didn't meet my eyes. I walked past them without a glance and took my place next to Arlen. "You ready?" he asked under his breath. "I've been ready since the night she handed me an empty box." The judge entered moments later, a woman in her 60s with short white hair and the kind of expression that made you sit up straighter. She greeted the court, looked through the paperwork in front of her, then paused. Her eyes narrowed at the second folder Arlen had submitted. "This court has received two versions of the Langford estate will," she began. "The first, dated October 2nd, 2017, names Mr. Cassian Langford as the primary heir. The second, notarized and dated August 14th, 2017, lists Miss Demi Villaro as the sole beneficiary." She looked up. "This discrepancy requires immediate resolution." Arlen stood. "Your Honor, the second will was discovered in the possession of an independent third party and matches a previously notarized version provided by the decedent's personal lawyer, myself. The original was sealed and authenticated prior to any other documents being filed. We have additional testimony corroborating its legitimacy." Vera leaned toward her lawyer and whispered something. He stood next, feigning calm. "Your Honor, we intend to challenge the validity of that document. It was not presented during the original probate process and that's what makes this hearing necessary," the judge interrupted. "We'll proceed." Witnesses were called. Signatures compared. Testimonies replayed. When Brisa Clay took the stand, her voice was quiet but unwavering. "I was asked to destroy a letter written by Mr. Langford," she said, glancing briefly at Vera. "I didn't. I kept a copy. I knew it was wrong." The judge examined the letter and the matching original I had submitted. "The handwriting, paper, seal, everything matches," Arlen said, handing over verification from two forensic experts. Vera's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Callista stared at the tabletop. Cassian's hands were clenched together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. And then came the photo. Arlen displayed two versions of a Langford family portrait used in recent press. The one they'd published in the papers and on social media, the one I'd been cropped out of, and the original. The judge studied both. She said nothing at first, flipping between them as if trying to understand something beyond what she saw. "This isn't just erasure," she finally said. "This is misrepresentation." A low murmur passed through the back of the courtroom. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. After a pause, the judge spoke again. "This court recognizes the prior will, dated August 14th, as the legitimate and final expression of the decedent's intent. The estate belongs to Miss Demi Villaro." There was no cheering, no applause, just silence, the kind that wraps around the truth like a blanket pulled tight. I stood slowly, looked across the room at the three people who had spent years pretending I didn't exist. Vera's expression cracked, ever so slightly. Callista grabbed her purse. Cassian stared at me like he was trying to recognize someone he had never actually seen before. I turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, I have one final document to submit." She nodded. "Proceed." I walked to the clerk's desk and handed over a sealed envelope. "This is a letter of intent," I said. 70% of the estate will be allocated to a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name. It will support students in Savannah pursuing degrees in agriculture and land preservation, his two passions. The judge raised her eyebrows slightly, but said nothing. "I'm not taking back what they stole," I added, my voice steady. "I'm returning what they used to define me." And then I walked back to my seat. When the hearing was over, people stood quietly. Vera didn't speak. Callista left first, her heels clicking too loudly against the courtroom tile. Cassian stayed frozen in place until a bailiff told him he had to leave. I gathered my things slowly. As I passed Vera, she whispered without looking at me, "Are you happy now?" I stopped, turned my head just enough to meet her gaze. "No," I said, "but I'm free." The last time I walked out of the courthouse, the air felt sharp. Not from cold, but clarity. I didn't look back. Not once. Not at Vera, not at Cassian, not at the echo of my own silence that used to haunt the back of every room they stood in. That silence wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to me. 3 months had passed since the ruling. It was winter now, the kind that drifted lazily along the coast, never quite biting, just brushing your skin like a warning you didn't need to heed. I'd moved into a modest home near Tybee Island, close enough to the water that I could hear the waves when I left the windows cracked. It wasn't a house full of memories. That was the point. No portraits on the walls, no curated legacy to maintain, just space to breathe. That morning, I sat on the porch wrapped in a cardigan I'd borrowed from Aunt Leonore months ago and never returned. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the quiet settle into my bones. A child ran along the beach in the distance, holding a red kite that danced clumsily against the pale sky. The breeze caught it just right, lifting it higher with each step the boy took. There was something freeing about watching something so simple fight the wind and win. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a single notification. From Cassian Langford. Subject, no title. I didn't open it right away. I looked out over the sand, past the child and the kite, let the stillness hold me a little longer before I peeled back another thread from what remained. When I finally opened it, the message was short. Plain. I'm not writing to defend anything, not to explain, not even to apologize. I just wanted you to know that if you ever want to talk about our childhood, not the mess after, just the beginning, I'd listen. There was no signature, just that I didn't respond, not because I was angry, not anymore, but because some doors don't need to be slammed shut, some are better left ajar and never walked through again. Aunt Leonore visited later that afternoon. She brought a store-bought pie she insisted she had baked. I didn't challenge her on it. We sat on the porch, watched the tide roll in, and she handed me a manila envelope. The foundation's getting its first wave of applications, she said. One of them stood out. I took the letter, unfolded it. A handwritten essay from a high school senior in rural Georgia. No name yet, just the content. My mother says I remind her of someone who turned her silence into steel. I don't know who that woman is, but I hope one day to meet her, or become her. I folded the letter carefully, placed it on the table. That one's yours, Leonore said softly, even if you never meet her. We ate in companionable silence, the kind I used to chase in therapy, thinking I had to earn it. But peace wasn't something anyone else could give me. That was the hardest lesson of all, and the most liberating. Later, as the sky turned coral pink, I walked down the path to the shoreline. The air had that salty crispness only winter brought to the coast. My jacket hugged close. In my hand was a single envelope, unsigned, undated, unaddressed. Inside was a letter I'd written months ago, a final draft I'd never sent. To him. Grandpa, I did it. You were right. They tried to erase me, but I carved my way back in. Not through begging, not with rage, but with truth. Quiet, sharp, relentless. Thank you for seeing me before anyone else ever did. I knelt by the edge of the water. Let the tide curl around my boots, watched the paper float before the waves pulled it away. It wasn't dramatic, no cinematic gesture, just release. Behind me, the porch light flicked on. Leonore's silhouette passed behind the curtains. Inside was warmth, not from history, but from healing. Vera never contacted me again, not even when her charity board forced her to step down due to financial opacity. Callista moved to Charleston. Rumor was she joined a wellness startup and stopped using the Langford name. Cassian stayed, still in Savannah, still chasing the next thing to make him feel important. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he was speaking at a real estate luncheon next month. Someone joked he hadn't figured out how to introduce himself now that he wasn't the heir. As for me, I work at a nonprofit now. Unrelated to the Langford name, no last name legacy needed, just paperwork, project grants, and a quiet corner office with a view of the marsh. Sometimes people ask about my family. I say, they're complicated. And that's enough. I don't lead with pain anymore, but I don't hide it either. That story, they thought it was theirs to write, but I took the pen back. They stole my name from the will, but I reclaimed it in the world. And this time, no one can erase me. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who raised us. But in reclaiming her voice, Demi didn't just fight for justice. She reminded us that silence, when owned, can be the most powerful form of strength. Have you ever had to walk away from family to find yourself? or fight to be seen by the very people who claim to love you? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories just like this one.